So why does it seem like there's a lot of political divide, polarization? This is something I've been thinking about for a long time. Is that there is a lot of variables to this social media, recommendation algorithms. Now, of course, with the advent of AI, generative AI, it's accelerated this. But I think that all of these are a symptom of a much, much bigger disease within society. Dis-ease. And I think that has to do with the dissolution of self, the dissipation of identity. Let's say 100 years ago, most of our lives were spent within like 50 mile or 100-kilometer radius of where we were born. Of course, people moved around. We had boats, trains, and it was the automobiles were starting to become popular. Bicycles were invented, hot air balloons, planes were also getting started as well. So people could move around, yes, but there was still a sense of like a local focused. The place where you live is the place where you work, is the place where you get married, is the place you were born, is the place you die, right? It was all connected together, generally. But with TV, radio, or radio, TV, commercial airliners, even more transportation options with the internet, social media, now people can identify with people all across the globe. They can build digital communities. The strength of digital communities, of course, is it's global, right? It doesn't have to be located in a specific place. That's also its weakness as well, right? It's not as it's not a grounded sense of community, right? It's not physically there. And because of that, I think we have been replacing a lot of our physical, grounded communities with digital. And that's kind of what we wanted, right? We wanted the convenience, right? We wanted the maybe I can call it quote unquote freedom from physical communities. But because of that, our sense of self, our identity has dissipated. When our sense of self is very secure, right? When it's very physical, when it's very immanent, present, then our sense of self is it's here, right? It's rock solid, right? It's like focused. But when it's all right, when my sense of self comes from this community there, right? This community over there, right? Like digitally, it's not, it doesn't have quite as much of it doesn't have that presence, right? It's not physical. That's the biggest strength and the biggest weakness of digital communities. And I think because of that, people, we're social creatures. We want to belong, right? We want to be in a community, right? To engage with the community. But because more and more of our physical communities have been replaced by digital communities, our sense of self has dissipated, right? Which paradoxically makes us seek more and more extreme ways of identifying. People are basically lacking a sense of real physical communities, right? So people are trying to replace that with digital communities, right? That same sort of weight, right? The same sort of emotional significance. People are placing a lot of emotional significance on very dissipated sense of communities, right? And I think that's what's really driving the loneliness epidemic and also the political divide, right? Because Now, people now don't identify with their local communities or with their local traditions or with their local places, right? They identify with nebulous, abstract senses of community, right? Which is why, right? We need that visceral, physical community. We need it. We need it. But because we haven't been able to, a lot of us haven't been able to fully satisfy our need for physical communities, where we end up creating this sort of like tribal identity through politics, right? Through sports, through etc. Right? Pop culture. Um, a couple of years ago, pop culture, or let's say a century ago, pop culture was not a thing, right? It did not exist. Yes, there were things that were almost global. Like let's take the Bible, right? People, a huge percentage of the world read the Bible even 100 years ago, or even 500 years ago, right? Especially in Europe, at least. But it's not really pop culture, right? Because it's more so the fabric, the underlying foundation of the civilization as a whole, right? The difference between pop culture and foundational culture, right? Like mythological, um, the mythology, the symbolism. The difference is pop culture is more it's more conscious, right? Pop culture is a more conscious effort, whereas the foundational culture is more subconscious, right? You don't or unconscious, right? You don't even really think about it. So of course, with radio, television, newspapers, right? All this technology allowed us to, for the first time, become part of a more ephemeral type of culture, which is pop culture. Same with sports, same with politics, right? What was initially something that was more removed from daily life became more integrated into our identities, right? With politics, sport, like let's take 100 years ago. Yes, people read about sports in the newspapers, but it wasn't really people didn't really identify with it as much as people do today, right? Because we have computers, we have internet. And so because of all this technology, which allows us to be, it's basically like 24/7 breaking news, right? It's that breaking news syndrome, basically. Because we're so caught up in things that don't actually really matter to us, we our sense of self is it's much weaker than it used to be, right? It's much more anxious. We're anxious people, right? We're not secure in our sense of self, right? But this is what we wanted. We wanted freedom from physical communities, right? Because physical communities, local communities can be very heavy, right? It can be you're basically born with your community, with your identity already decided, right? So we wanted freedom from that, right? But that freedom came at the cost of our sense of self. To be free from community is to also be free from our identity, right? To be insecure. So I think that's what's driving the polarization, tribalism. People want to belong to a community, right? But they can't find it physically, right? So they attach their identity to abstract, amorphous groups, right? That don't exist physically. They only exist digitally. So I think things like walkable cities, third places, these help tremendously because now you have the option to engage physically. But we know even in places with that are walkable, even with third places, right? Even in these places, people are lonely. They may be less lonely, right? But even in these places, people are still lonely because these digital spaces are so captivating, right? It's almost like it's like junk food, right? It's like junk food, right? It's so addicting, right? The sugar, the salt, the fat, right? It's so addicting. Um, we almost were basically like rats that created our own traps, right? We've entrapped ourselves. I think there's I don't really see it as a problem to be solved because this is the choice that we made. But I, mm, I do hope we can reunite with our sense of community, with our sense of self. Maybe people will wake up and realize. Maybe I will wake up and realize I know how addicting my cell phone can be. It can be very, very addicting. Or maybe we have to become so alienated, right? So isolated from our sense of self, right? So removed from our physical presence, from our physical body, from the meaning of work, right? From the fruits of our labor, from our communities, from our relations, from nature. We might have to be so removed, so isolated, so alienated that enough is enough, right? And we transform. I'm not sure how I'm not sure how things will go. I think that's probably the biggest crisis of this era: alienation. Alienation from labor, alienation from work, alienation from relationships, alienation from community, alienation from ourself.